and as always, look forward to our time studying here today. We're going to be in the book of Isaiah as we began last week. This morning, we are going to look at the second chapter. As I mentioned last week, we're not going to go in depth into each one. We're not going to spend a week on all 66. You'd be able to. You would get a lot out of that. There's plenty to find. This is an endlessly practical, useful, majestic book in so many ways, but we will kind of pick our spots. Our spot this morning is chapter 2, and we'll be there for our entire class. So open up your Bibles, please. Before we start reading and studying together, Brother Steve Couch is going to lead a prayer for us. We'll ask him to do that now and then study. Steve. Amen. Thank you. All right, let's read these first 4 verses. Actually, we'll go ahead and read to verse 5 of Isaiah chapter 2. The word that Isaiah the son of Amoz saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Many people shall come and say, Come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. O house of Jacob, come and let us walk in the light of the Lord. We are familiar with the distance between, oftentimes the distance between perception and reality, or desire and reality sometimes. What rumor and gossip might say about a person might not match who they really are. I can remember many times as a kid having a teacher who was, I just heard from everyone, this is the teacher you don't want to get. Man, you don't want to have to be in Miss Ledusky's class. That's going to be the worst. You're gonna hate every minute of that. And then I come into 5th grade and I think, Miss Ledusky's cool. I like her. I always kind of like mean teachers. Maybe that's part of what the disconnect was. But you have this built up in your mind, and then, oh, okay, well, it's actually a little bit different than that. Or you see the discrepancy between the ideal and reality. If you've ever ordered a fast food item based on a commercial, and then you get what it really is, I've never gotten a 6-inch high hamburger from McDonald's. I've never gotten anything close to that. You see, well, this is not really what it was built up to be. The ideal, the perception, what was sold, isn't what is actually there. Sometimes there is optimism in that distance, in that discrepancy. Think of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. He's talking about something, a vision for the country, something you would like to see happen, the ideal, maybe with the idea that, well, we can get there. We could achieve that. This is something that we and our children and their children can work towards. This is a goal, a vision for the future. I think I see or perceive something similar happening here in the opening stages of Isaiah chapter 2, especially because we are in chapter 2 taking a sharp turn away from how chapter 1 felt, where things are very bad and the nation is not looking good at all and things really could not be worse from by every possible metric. The social situation, politically, spiritually, just everything was very bad. Well, now we have this very hopeful, grand language opening up chapter 2. Well, don't get too comfortable in that, because then in verse 6, we're going to take another sharp turn right back to seeing how terrible things are and how dire straits the nation truly was. These first 5 verses then seem to serve to show us the ideal, the vision, what it could be, what we would want things to be, what God wanted things to be. but they were so very, very far away from it at this time. So let's consider here, first of all, what he says about the ideal, what could have happened or what should have or what will or what God wanted. And it will come to pass in the latter days, he's saying, that this mountain of the Lord's house will be established. Mountain imagery is a lot of times going to be signaling that we're talking about God or God's activity, and to the people of the time who had their other gods, they often associated them with mountains, but the Lord is telling them about his mountain, and specifically Zion is its name given there later on in verse 3, and he's told us this is a word concerning Jerusalem, so he's kind of setting it in a physical place, but more than that, it's imagery. But he's telling us that they flow to this place there in verse 2. And I think there's probably an intentional, inversion of nature or the way things work. Which way do rivers flow? Uphill or downhill? You never have a river that goes up to the top of a mountain. It comes down from the top of a mountain. And here he's talking about people flowing, but it kind of calls up the imagery of a river, of something that's a stream, something that's flowing, but they're going to the top of the mountain. Well, that isn't natural, and this process isn't natural, or it doesn't just happen. They're being drawn by God, and they're coming to him. They want to see him. They are going in that direction. They do that for spiritual benefit and to know God, to know his ways. They want to learn of him. They want to receive his judgment. That judgment that is mentioned there in verse 4, he shall judge between the nations, doesn't necessarily have the connotation. A lot of times when we talk about judgment, we're talking about something negative. We're maybe kind of assuming or implying a bad verdict. If you judge someone, that means you are telling them they're wrong. You are telling them that they're at fault. But this judgment that we are talking about there is more just that he's administering his justice, that he's overseeing them, that he's leading them, that he is teaching them, he is showing them the right ways. He'll judge between the nations. Yes, he'll arbitrate their disputes, and so they enjoy peace. That's another key component of what's going on there. But that they come to him for guidance, and that they come to him to learn. So it's tied up with that idea in the previous verse of learning about his ways and being able to walk in his paths. But there is that peace that we mentioned there in verse 4. The nations are getting rid of their instruments for war. They're getting rid of swords and spears, and they're getting rid of the cause for war. They don't want to be at war with each other anymore, and they're getting rid of the knowledge of how to do it. They won't learn anymore about warfare. They're kind of forgetting how to do that. They're scrapping the plans that they had. They're doing away with all of that. And specifically, I guess, I don't know, I think there's significance to the idea in verse 4 that what are they turning the swords and spears into? And why is that useful, or why might that be significant? Okay, what do you do with plowshares and pruning hooks?
Farming tools.
They're farming tools. Okay. That's growth. That's life. You can feed people if you have a plowshare and a pruning hook. You can tend to land and enjoy its produce if you have plowshares and a pruning hook. You can, maybe most significantly, this is where my mind goes to, and I think a lot of time it's where biblical language goes to, you can tend to a garden with these kinds of implements. These agricultural metaphors and motifs a lot of times have this at their root. What are the people doing when they come and hear God's judgment and walk in his ways and are taught by him and have sought him out and put away their implements for war? They're returning, in essence, to the original state. They're returning to the garden. They are going back to the original purpose that God made man for, to exist in fellowship with him, unbroken and pure and unadulterated, and that's what they're then able to enjoy. And so they're received for this judgment by God, and they benefit from it. They prosper from it. And that verse 5 maybe summarizes it, walking in the light of the Lord. This sounds very good. In terms of fulfillment, we're going to talk more about Isaiah's immediate purpose for including this image. But think, too, in terms of has this been fulfilled yet? Is this the case? Is it something we're waiting for in the future? What do we think he is talking about? Or what are some possibilities or among the things that he is talking about? What's Isaiah really picturing here? Yeah, Gary?
There's a very good parallel passage that we can go to and will help us to illuminate what Isaiah said. That's in Joel 2:28 and verses following.
Okay. Very, very similar ideas mentioned in Joel chapter 2, Brother Garin mentions. And interestingly, there's something about the twos. This seems to be one of several kind of chapter 2s that we see linked together. Joel 2, Isaiah 2, the second Psalm, Daniel 2. Picture all nations flowing to the Lord, being taught by him. What does that sound like from a New Testament perspective? That's Acts 2. That's Pentecost. That's all these nations coming, and here they've gathered up. Luke records all of them in Acts chapter 2. They come from all over the place. They come from all over the known world. And what happens when they're there? Well, they're taught. They hear the Lord's ways and know how they can walk in them. And he judges. And what do they do after that time? He tells us at the end of that chapter. Well, they continued in the apostles' doctrine. They continued to learn. They continued to hear all of those things. What was the result of that? They want peace. They hear what they've done. They hear we're at enmity with God. We've crucified the Lord in Christ. We've crucified Jesus. But Peter says, you can have peace. You can come to the Lord and not worry about fighting with each other and not worrying about fighting with God. And the fellowship that they enjoy, the teaching that they receive, the judgment that they receive, the pursuit of all of these things that he is talking about here. I think we see that playing out in Acts chapter 2. Now, yes, it can still have a as yet still future idea that you would be looking to even more in the future, but that Acts 2, as I mentioned, fulfills several Old Testament prophecies, has vestiges of a lot of those in there. Joel 2 is actually quoted in the second chapter of Acts, quoted by Peter in his sermon. And again, just several things coming to fruition there. But this is one of them, I think. So, something that, if we are looking at it as Christians, there should be an element of truth to this image, this thing that is being perceived right here. There should be a lot of this at play in our lives right now. Don't be looking at Isaiah 2 and say, boy, that'll be the day. Won't that be great? There should be the fabric of this. There should be the threads of this already present in our lives, that we have come to God, that we do attend patiently and resolutely to his ways and walk in his paths, that we seek out the things that he's talking about. We'll mention a little bit more about how that's the case here in a moment. Anything further there? Here, verses 1 through 5 or so. Yeah, David.
Is another chapter 2, Ephesians 2, where he preached peace and reconciliation.
Yeah. Same thing being found there. Definitely. Anything else? All right. We get to verse 6 then, and here's where things come back into the area that we don't actually want to be in. We've seen the ideal. That's the ideal Zion. They flow to God. They flow to the mountaintop and are drawn by God. They seek spiritual benefit. They desire to know God. They desire to know his ways. They enjoy peace. They are received by God for judgment. What's really going on in Israel or in Judah? Look in verse 6. For you, he's speaking to the Lord, you have forsaken your people, the house of Jacob, because they are filled with eastern ways. They are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they are pleased with the children of foreigners. Their land is also full of silver and gold, and there's no end to their treasures. Their land is also full of horses, and there's no end to their chariots. Their land is also full of idols. They worship the work of their own hands, that which their own fingers have made. People bow down, and each man humbles himself. Therefore, do not forgive them. All right. If ideally the picture that God has for his people is that all other nations come to Zion and learn of God there, the reality that we're seeing instead is what? That Israel, that Judah, is conforming to the other nations. They are taking on the character of the people around them. They're like the Philistines. They're like the people of lands to the east of them who have soothsayers. East, west, north, south, on every hand, they're surrounded by people who do not know the Lord, who do not follow him, who follow idolatry and all these other various things. They instead conform to the nations. Here is the ideal, what they're looking for, that they seek spiritual benefit. Why do they come to the mountain? Why are they pleased to do this? Let us go up to the house of the Lord. There's a lot of money there. Ooh, I heard there's treasure in Mount Zion. No, they're not going for that. They have spiritual interests. What's going on in Judah? They care only for material excess. The land is full of silver and gold. There's no end to their treasures. They're just heaping up as much money as they can for themselves, just trying to profit, just trying to get rich, trying to place all of their trust in that. In the ideal version, they're seeking, again, to know God. They want knowledge. They want to learn his ways. They want instruction of the Lord. Now, the reality, they don't really need that. Why? What else is the land full of in verse 8?
Idols.
Full of idols.
False worship.
Make your own God. I mean, you don't really need to know, you don't need to learn anything about Jehovah. Just, I don't know, come up with one on your own. Or keep looking around until you find one that already exists that fits your general. Yeah, I kind of like this one. I tried the Philistine thing for a while, and then I had my Amorite phase. But now I've gone with this, and I think I really like what the Babylonians are doing. I kind of like that. I think that's probably what the gods would be like, and so I'll go with that. The land is full of idols. They've really done everything that they can to bring in any other thing to worship other than Jehovah, and have just melded all of these things together. They worship only the work of their own hands. They're content making their own gods. They don't have any interest in learning of him because they can simply make their own. Gary?
Ecclesiastes all over again. There's nothing new in the world. Look around us.
Yeah.
We got the same kind of thing going on today. We start out humble. We start out when we obey the gospel. We humble ourselves before God. We accept what he has to offer us, which is salvation. But then we get to thinking about, well, look what I did. Look at all the things that I've amassed. We get carried away with the material things of life.
Yeah.
Amongst other things.
Uh,
The world entices us, and that's exactly what's going on with it.
Yeah, and we're going to see, and we're going to ask in a moment, I mean, have things essentially changed? And no, I think the answer is clear that they haven't. We saw them enjoying peace there in the end of verse 4. beating swords into plowshares, beating spears into pruning hooks, getting rid of their armaments of war. What's going on instead? In verse 7, their land is full of horses and chariots. These are the powerful weapons of war, the powerful resources of war in the ancient day. If you have more chariots than the enemy, you're almost certainly going to win. If you have more horses, more cavalry, you're almost certainly going to win. This is how they measure strength. This is how they measure preparedness for war. And that's what Israel has tried to fill itself with. That's how they've tried to gauge their well-being, is by looking into those things. They haven't done anything about peace. They're just storing up weaponry. And in the ideal, we saw God being receptive to this, of course. They're coming to him, and God is pleased with that. Well, here, the unfortunate reality, they are forsaken, a forsaken people in verse 6. And Isaiah closes that at the end in verse 9 by really asking, kind of an unusual thing to find a prophet saying, but he's saying, don't forgive it. Don't let them off the hook for that. They're forsaken. They're denied forgiveness. All right, now, with each of these five, let's do, as we did last week, and as we always should, let's not just beat Israel up or Judah and point out how foolish they were and how short they came in trying to fulfill this. And let's not simply say, yes, what a wicked and terrible world we live in, that we kind of mirror this thing right now in our society. True though that may be, these words are also written for our benefit, for us to be able to take stock, not simply to kind of like the prayer of the Pharisee, just be glad that we're not like other men, but to investigate, well, how am I doing? If this is the ideal, do I match that? Do I meet that kind of standard? So, if they are being criticized, if they are being judged for conforming to the nations, have we truly marked ourselves off as something unique and distinct from the world that might cause other people to seek the Lord? Or is it just camouflage? Just we've blended in so well. We're just so much a part of everything like the world around us that there is no difference. You could tell someone, yes, I'm a Christian, and they'd say, huh, okay. And it would just go on, and there would be no, oh, well, I guessed that, or yes, I would have thought. They might just, that shouldn't really be the way our faith is lived out, that we simply resemble all of the evil and all of the apathy around us. They care only for material excess, and that is to their discredit. Let's consider, where do our priorities lie when we're considering things? When we're considering where to invest, and I don't mean our money, I don't mean retirement, when we're trying to figure out, what do I give my time to? How do I use my resources that are available? Money, yes, but time and effort and intellectual capital, how much time we spend thinking about things, everything that we have at our disposal, our investments of time and effort, when we're trying to succeed, when we're trying to make a profit, does that go to silver and gold, or does it go to the kinds of things that the ideal Zion seeks out? They are content in making their own gods, not learning of Jehovah. Do we begin with a desire to truly know who God is, what he's communicated to us, and about life and existence in general as he has described it? Or do we first begin with our own conception, our own creation of God, and work backwards to make the God of the Bible sort of fit that picture? We use language a lot of times like, well, I wouldn't believe in a God who did so-and-so, or I don't think he would have done it. It doesn't feel like something that God would have done to me. I know what people mean sometimes when we say things like that, but a lot of times it betrays an unhealthy attitude where I've come to the conclusion that this is who he is and this is what he's all about. And so If I can see on this page it doesn't match that, then I just take that out and forget about it and move on to making this God of myself. They're storing up weaponry. That's as much punishment. I think there in verse 7, their land is full of horses and chariots. It's as much punishment, I think, as it is cause for punishment. There is embedded in that the idea that Judah needs these things. I mean, they're constantly beset by enemies. They have to try to think about how many guys do we have that can go to war? How many chariots do we have? Are the stores full in case we get besieged? Because we have so many enemies, because we have consistently avoided doing God's will. So it is a punishment as much as it is cause for punishment. But again, let's ask of ourselves, do we look for peace or war? And here we're probably not talking literally, although maybe that comes into play as well. But think more on the ground level, on a day-to-day level. Do you look for healing and reconciliation? Or do you look for acrimony and slander? Are you going to take vengeance upon someone? Or are you going to try to make peace and call a truce and get back to things in a peaceful way? That's what they are failing in. We must not do the same. And I guess the final idea is the outcome, that they are a forsaken people, they're denied forgiveness. We have to consider that very carefully. Are we clear on the outcomes of our decision? That God's view of us and God's response to us is at stake. That's what is being discussed. That he will view us based on our adherence to his ways or our rejection of his ways. That it isn't just kind of like picking a major in college. It doesn't really matter which one you do morally. That's not what's under discussion. God will be pleased and will count you among those who are his, or you will be forsaken, outside, not forgiven. Those are the stakes. All right, I've talked quite a bit there. Comments, questions, anything to add or discuss here in these first 9 verses or so? Yeah, Matt.
Just reminded, like when you read especially verse 7, it sounds like an amazing place. You have silver and gold, you have land full of horses. And my mind went to Matthew 5, where it talks about the salt of the earth. And if you lose its flavor, then you may as well throw it out, it's worth nothing. So these things in and of themselves are not bad, but when you take God out of the equation, then they're worth nothing.
Definitely so, and as we usually see when that is the criticism or the complaint lobbed against them, as Matt points out, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having some money. You kind of need money to exist in the world. A lot of times he sends his people into battle. They needed horses, they needed chariots at times. Nothing wrong with those things in and of themselves. But similar to David numbering the people in the census, and God is very upset with that, kind of an unusual story from both Samuel and Chronicles. And we point out, what was the crime there? What was wrong with that? Because it's showing that's where his trust is. It's showing that's his first thought, his first motivation is, I got to use these things to take care of myself. I got to use these things to get ahead. I got to use these things to measure my success and my fitness and all those kinds of things. And there is no thought given for God is at the root of that. Others? All right, continue on into verse 10 then. We won't read all of these together. Verses 10 through 18, really the rest of the chapter, verses 10 through 21 are just a couple of more judgments highlighting what's wrong, what is going wrong, where things are breaking down. Verse 22 then is a final appeal to really just choose the right side. It's kind of just making one final appeal to Judah to say, figure it out, do differently. I mean, you guys can see which side is right. Please pick the right one. But before that, in verses 10 through 21, really two particular things that he's taking aim at, and they've already been addressed a little bit in the preceding, but especially the pride of man and the idolatry that was going on in Judah. You see there in verse 10, after telling him about the kind of frightening, I mean, the terror of the Lord is the phrase used. It's the terrifying might and holiness of God. What effect does that have, or why is that in such stark relief against what is going on? In verse 11, the lofty looks of man shall be humbled, the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. For the day of the Lord of hosts shall come upon everything proud and lofty, upon everything lifted up, and it shall be brought low, upon all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, upon all the oaks of Bashan, upon all the high mountains, and upon all the hills that are lifted up, upon every high tower, and upon every fortified wall, upon all the ships of Tarshish, and upon all the beautiful sloops. The loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of men shall be brought low. The Lord alone shall be exalted in that day, but the idols he shall utterly abolish. And that shifts his emphasis into the next point. But consider there that pride, first of all. We're actually going to talk about this in a little more detail, I guess, in our sermon in a moment, about the things that God truly finds distasteful, which is kind of a surprising list biblically. Again, I won't preach my sermon now and then do it later too, but we'll get to that more in an hour or so. But this idea is one of them of pride. We don't really think a lot of times, I mean, maybe intellectually we know pride is bad. Yeah, I don't want to be full of myself. We don't want to be conceited. We don't want to be arrogant. We try to teach our kids, not to showboat and brag about yourself or whatever it is. We try not to measure our success against others. We try not to just do many things that exhibit pride. However, society at large oftentimes has a positive view of pride. Many different civilizations and cultures really have held it up as a virtue rather than a vice, as something that, you should have these feelings of pride in yourself, etc. But a lot of times I don't know, maybe if it's kind of just spin at work, but we view it as something good, view it as something that everybody needs some of, and that when you exhibit it, it's, right on, man. Don't let anybody trample you. Don't let anybody tell you you're less than. And again, I understand the motive behind some of that. There are, I guess, good motives behind some of that. And we can talk and have looked before of the idea that I do think biblically there are some things obviously to be proud of. There are some things or some times where a sense of pride is mentioned in a positive sense. It's not ever in self, I would find, but nonetheless. What Isaiah is talking about here and what the problem is, mentioned there in verse 11, which sounds very similar to Proverbs 6. The lofty look, one of the things that the Lord hates, mentioned in Proverbs chapter 6, a haughty look, a haughty face. How often do we think of this as, let alone something that is terrible, just even being something that's that bad? It's just not something many people spend a lot of time worrying about. This sense of I can do anything I want. I can do everything I want. I can and should achieve all of my wildest dreams because I have the skill, I have the drive, I have the knowledge, I have what other people don't have. I've got this, whatever it is, grit and determination and or the cocktail of things that's going to lead me to success. And fine, succeed. Try to do your best. Whatever you decide to do it to the best of your ability. But the emphasis that our society, that our culture places on simply building ourselves up into something, on maximizing every aspect of our personality, on not just being good at something, being the best at something, not just making a good living, making an unbelievable living, not just being happy, being wildly happy all days of your life, not just having a nice vacation, go on the vacation of your dreams, but the idea of everything to the max, everything to its limit. That's not the ideal that we find in Scripture so many times, where God looks upon the lofty. He has this catalog of all the high things, and they're all just sort of, kind of like stock images of picture the great things. We'd think of maybe the great cities of our time, or the, great monuments, or great, natural features, whatever it might be. That's what he's talking about, the cedars of Lebanon and all these sorts of things. He says that stuff is all going to be lowered when it gets too high. When it thinks too much of itself, that's when it gets squashed down. So I guess my point is, we don't typically think of this as something that is a problem. If we take the Bible seriously at all, pride is an enormous problem. The prophets time and time and time again will tell people, Judah or some other nation like Edom in the book of Obadiah, here's what the problem is, here's why you are being judged, here's why your nation is going to be destroyed, because you are full of yourselves, because you think that you can solve every problem, because you think that you can keep yourself alive by sheer will, because you think that you are the answer to everything. You're not. We have to get rid of that view of self, of that attitude in ourselves. It's absolutely toxic. It's poisonous to our souls. Well, beginning there in verse 18 and then going down to verse 21, taking up the thread we saw earlier in verse 8, but the idea again of idolatry and a judgment against that. This will be a theme that Isaiah returns to numerous times. He has, as you would expect, in a land that is filled with idols, he's going to have a lot to say to criticize about idolatry. Maybe chapter 44, 45 is among the best takedowns of this entire system. Already we're seeing the seeds planted for the foolishness of it. That was back in verse 8. What are you worshiping when you worship an idol?
The work of your hands.
Something you made. Isn't that, how does that make sense? Like, I make Legos with the kids, right? All right, Malcolm, we just made this Lego castle. Let's get down and worship that. That's probably powerful. This probably has, I don't know, some kind of goodness or power to it. It can do something for us, I know. I don't know, I just feel it, that these Legos are going to, they'll bring us good rains this year, or whatever it might be. Well, no, man, I made that myself. I put that together with my own hands. I know that there's nothing in there. If anyone knows, I should know. I was there the whole process. I was chiseling away. I went and cut the tree down that we made it out of, and then I carved it into the right shape, and then I set it on its little thing, and I put all the, I did all of that. That's totally the work of my hands. But he is going to say here in verse 18, and actually we will take time to read that, the idols he shall utterly abolish. They'll go into the holes of the rocks and in the caves of the earth from the terror of the Lord and the glory of his majesty. Phrase he's used before, when he arises to shake the earth mightily. In that day a man will cast away his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which they made, each for himself to worship. to the moles and bats, to go into the clefts of the rocks and into the crags of the rugged rocks from the terror of the Lord and the glory of his majesty when he arises to shake the earth mightily. He is telling them judgment is coming. The time of the Lord visiting his creation again is at hand. And when that happens, how much good is the idol? Not even worth the tree that you cut down to make it, not even worth the material that you used to put that thing together. It's less than worthless. You're going to throw it out for the rodents. You're going to throw it out just as waste, and it's not going to do anything to help. This is a clear judgment, but a clear point that shows the foolishness, the waste, the absolute pointlessness of it all, that it can't do anything. It can't do what you're looking for it to do. In the context of Isaiah, and we'll see later on as we get to some of the more historical sections, we've seen references to it already, that this is a people at war. This is a people with conflict going on all around them. The city is going to be besieged later on. They're going to be in real times of uncertainty. Well, that's when people go to religion, isn't it? That's when people go to God or gods or something that's going to save them in the foxhole, in the times of greatest distress and uncertainty. And so that's the warning here. Who are you looking to save you in that time? Don't look there. That's not going to accomplish anything. Constantly this comparison will be made. Wilson, you had something a moment
You
ago.
were speaking about telling your son, let's pray to this.
Mhm.
I know that was jokingly that you would have said that to him. But if you said a prayer to him today, tomorrow watch, because he will probably pray to it tomorrow
Oh, sure.
on his own.
Sure.
And that's what we have to be very careful for. How do we present our life to God, and how do we present God to other people that they won't turn back around and misuse what you said?
Yeah. These are learned behaviors. Everything that we're talking about in chapter 2 didn't develop overnight from one guy deciding. It was a process over time, a process of learning from previous mistakes. All right. Yeah, Nathan. The constant, again, the comparison that will run throughout the entire book, you choose one or the other. You choose all of these other things, or you choose God. The final, I'll end on this, the phrase there in verse 22, as he's making that final appeal, he talks about man whose breath is in his nostrils. I think the significance of that statement, once that's used up, he's kind of looking at a single breath that man has. You've taken in that one. And when that's gone, there's no guarantee of a next one. Man's breath is in his nostrils. It's right there. That's your life right here between that one and the next one. You don't have the next one of your own resources, of your own power. All that you have is right there in that one. That's the only thing you can really claim as your own right now. You just tuck it out from God's air into your body, and that one's used up. You need another one. You can't make that yourself. Why would we trust him? Why would we trust ourselves in the things we created? There's only one being deserving of our allegiance, our confidence. That's who Isaiah is going to show to us. All right, I'm going to end on that note. Thank you very much for your time. As always, we'll continue on next